The only reason things did not get really, really, really bad is because China did demand destruction locally and reduced their imports. If they hadn't done that, it's very possible we already would have run off the cliff. However, they can't do it forever. I really, really, really recommend you guys to structure your lives in a way that can account for, like, catastrophic infrastructure failure when it comes to the availability of petroleum products. Would highly recommend that.
In the past couple of days, the war in Iran has apparently restarted in earnest. Both the US and Iran have traded strikes and disavowed diplomacy, with Trump saying the recently agreed Memorandum of Understanding is over, and the Iranians describing further negotiations as futile. Unsurprisingly, the Iranians have reacted by, once again, declaring the Strait of Hormuz closed. This has pushed oil prices up a bit, but not by that much, which might explain why Trump sounds so confident about restarting a war that he was apparently desperate to stop only last month. However, in this video, we're going to explain why Trump's confidence might be misplaced, and why a non-linear oil crisis, in other words, a sudden spike in oil prices rather than a gradual increase, looks increasingly likely.
We've been leaning on TLDR News for a while now. They do really good work. I appreciate their summaries.
Because there's more in too long into it. As we see it, there were at least 3 reasons to think that a spike in oil prices is now looking increasingly possible. The first and most obvious is that the war in Iran has apparently restarted, and the global oil market is more fragile than it first appears.
Yep.
We covered this in detail in last week's video, but the TLDR is that the main reason that global oil prices didn't skyrocket...
The only reason things did not get really, really, really bad is because China did demand destruction locally and reduced their imports. If they hadn't done that, it's very possible we already would have run off the cliff. However, they can't do it forever. Not only can they not do it forever, but they have not been able to entirely mitigate the loss of supply with their demand destruction. Like, we're still, like, Europe and America are still currently drawing down their strategic petroleum reserves.
After the Strait of Hormuz was closed last time, as many people expected them to, was because the world went into the war with unusually well-stocked inventories, and was able to draw them down at record rates to increase supply, thus keeping prices relatively low. But this obviously couldn't go on forever, and after a couple of months...
Oh my god, what are these DSA left arguments, dude? Holy shit. Rural chapters would get fucked over by a national presidential campaign in terms of resource and manpower drain? Dog, this is a Republican argument. This is like a Senate tier argument. Oh, we can't hold a national non-binding vote on whether we support AOC because rural chapters won't get... What the fuck are we talking about? This is why you have to fight off the infinite... The fractioning, you have to fight off against this. This is why I've always argued the DSA should have a stronger national organization. I think the DSA right's going to win on this. It just might take a while.
Most inventories were running dangerously low. Trump actually made this explicit.
No, my Arkansas chapter with 5 members, my reading group, no.
The G7 summit last month, when, in trying to justify his deal, he claimed that the world was just 4 weeks away from running out of oil.
A lot of money. That's why the world is okay. It's liquid. It's fine. Also, we run out of reserves in about 4 weeks. You know, there are reserves all over the world, and we would really run out. And there'll be a time when you wouldn't be able to get it. And you want to see bedlam?
We've started dipping into both sweet and sour oil, meaning we have reached the operational floor. We've never dipped into both at the same time. Wait, can you give me an article on that? Have we started dipping into sour oil? Are we going into those stockpiles as well? Do you have an article on that?
Surprisingly, stockpiles haven't had time to recover in the month or so since the ceasefire was announced. In fact, the most recent data suggests that countries have actually continued to draw them down since, presumably in an attempt to bring down global oil prices as fast as possible. This means that we're going back into a war with depleted stockpiles, which means we have far less of a cushion to absorb any Hormuz-related drop in supply. The second...
What is sweet and sour oil? Okay, so it's a way of measuring how crude needs to be refined to be useful. Sweet crude, like the stuff you get in Texas, is relatively easy to refine. The resources that it takes to refine it, not very extensive. It's the good crude. Sour, less so. Takes more work to refine it. It's not as good. It's not as pure. It takes more work to refine. When we dip into our reserves, so when you dip into crude reserves, right? Because you have to reserve crude. You're not reserving gasoline. Gasoline is not shelf stable. You reserve the crude. You have to refine it. If you're refining it, that means you have to start pouring out the supply from the strategic reserve into refineries, right? Like you don't just dip the barrels of crude into the economy and the economy recovers or whatever. You need to send that shit over to the refineries. And if we're now dipping into sour, that would mean that we're pulling a greater number of refineries, a lot of which aren't local. Well, hold on. They could be local. I'd like to see an article on this. I guess a better way of describing it would be that we are dipping into less immediately useful reserves. Yeah, I've seen this chart multiple times, but I'd like to see it from a different source. The U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserves are now around 19 million barrels away from estimated minimum operating levels. There will very soon no longer be a safety buffer to protect the world from further losses out of the strait. You can see how close we got at the beginning of the Ukraine war. Biden drew it down, but then we started refilling it. Of course, now we're here again. I think this is inaccurate because, for one, this is definitely not the minimum operating level. This is probably the minimum operational stress level, at which point you start dipping into bad refineries. Sorry, not bad refineries. You get lower and lower grade crude to work with. 150 for military, 150 for cavern integrity. Yeah, a lot of the crude that we have reserved is strictly reserved for military reserves. Like, no matter what happens, the U.S. military must always have its reserve. So that's not getting dipped into. And then there's the fact that, yes, we store our reserves not in literal barrels, but in underground caverns. And if we take out too much too quickly, those caverns might literally collapse. In fact, the caverns that we're using primarily for petroleum storage in the United States, I'm pretty sure they were formed under Nixon, I think, and they were only meant to be operational for a few decades. We've been using them for twice as long as they were meant to be used, and we've drawn them down more times than they were meant to be drawn down for. Every time we draw down from that cavern, we increase the risk of a collapse. Basically, internal pressure holds the cavern together. The more you draw out from the cavern, the lower the pressure and the greater the likelihood that the entire network collapses, which would be catastrophic. Also, the more you draw down, the more bad sludge there is. Think of oil reserves not as like barrels of water, where the quality at the top is the same as the quality at the bottom, and think of it more like forever soup. You know the forever stews that like medieval taverns would have, where you keep it on a fire and you just keep adding water and ingredients? You know what I mean? The top of the forever stew is always fine, but if you ever like start taking too much, the lower down you go, now you're getting it like essentially soup sediment. And if you go down all the way to the bottom, you start getting at the fundamentals of the stew that you won't be able to replace by just adding new ingredients on top. You know? You don't want the ancient soup sediment. SPR drawdown today? Hold on, I don't intuitively know how to read this. 1 second. Reserve inventory, sweet and sour. 116 million of sweet, 200 of sour. Oh, man. Yeah. This is as of July 10th. It doesn't tell us what's happening today. It does confirm we're drawing down. Well, does it confirm we're drawing down sour? It's fine. We'll get more info on this later. Meanwhile, the cost of petroleum refined products remains high. This is the 3-to-1 WTI refining margin, a measure of how much money you make from the products of a barrel of crude versus the value of the crude itself. It's the profit you get from it. And you might notice that we're spiking pretty high right now, and that hasn't gone down. If you dig deep, what happens? Well, there's the possibility the cavern collapses. The cavern is held up by the pressure. Like, the oil you put into the caves is physically blocking it from collapsing. Like, a cave isn't going to collapse if it's filled with highly pressurized oil, of course. Like, it's being filled. There's no space for stuff to collapse into. But if you draw down the oil enough and it collapses, like you cause problems. We have caves we store oil in? Yeah, we're talking about hundreds of millions of barrels of oil. We don't keep that shit in a barrel. It's not stored in barrels? No, a barrel's an abstract unit of measurement. Like, they're not literally stored in barrels. I mean, sometimes they are. Can you swim in it? Yes. Very briefly. Very briefly. It's important to understand this.
This patch of land, about 70 miles outside of Houston, Texas, doesn't look like much. But if you zoom in, these little rectangles sit above a powerful economic and political tool. Just underground is a network of caverns full of oil, part of the U.S.'s Strategic Petroleum Reserve, or SPR. Since March, President Biden...
Specific caverns formed near the end of the Carter admin. Carter, not Nixon, during the OPEC crisis, but had a lifespan of around 20 years. Yeah. We filled these caverns up, not expecting we would need to use them for more than 20 years, but we've been using them now for about 45.
Biden has been tapping into it in a big way.
The Department of Energy
This is a
released
few years old, this video.
another 15 million barrels from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve.
Altogether, the administration will have released 180 million barrels in 2022, the largest drawdown from the SPR ever. Pumping from the reserve, the administration says, has helped lower Americans' energy bills and stabilize markets. But some oil industry experts disagree.
When we talk about the forces that are hitting the oil market, this does very little to change the...
Why wasn't the Ukraine oil supply problem as bad as the Iran oil problem? It was. Look at how much we drew down our strategic reserve because of the invasion from Russia. We drew it down massively. But the Biden administration, which is more competent than the Trump administration, made sure that they didn't draw it down to like stress levels, and they started to buffer it towards the end with policies that would make the oil more available. Like, we did a lot during the Biden administration to shore up this, like, to keep this from getting really, really, really catastrophic. It could have been a lot worse. Like, think of how bad the energy crisis got in Europe with the sudden cutting off of Russian natural gas. A lot of European states found themselves with like multiplied energy prices. The United States did draw down its reserves, but we did also take measures to prevent it from getting apocalyptically bad. But here we are.
Here's how the Strategic Petroleum Reserve can be used to try to bring down prices, and why some are skeptical that Biden's moves are working. Along the Texas and Louisiana coasts, the caverns are located in Bryan Mound, Big Hill, West Hackberry, and Bayou Choctaw. As of October 28th, the reserve held about 399 million barrels of oil.
You know, we're talking about 4 storage sites, 60 caverns. The largest one, I think, is big enough that you could fit.
By the way, this is why Cushing, Oklahoma is the like world, like the world crossroads for oil, because Cushing, Oklahoma is like an easy midway point that can be used to move oil from the strategic reserve to Cushing to like trucks or vice versa. Like it's a crossroads in part because of its proximity to these caverns.
The Willis Tower that you have in Chicago in it.
Look at this. Just imagine this. It's a salt mine we created more than 2,000 feet tall. We literally built it to be a gigantic oil tank, a natural oil tank. Well, not natural in the sense that it's a normal cavern, but natural in the sense we're using like, you know, a hole in the ground.
The tower for reference is 1,451 feet. So that's substantial. You can put a lot of oil in there.
So why does the U.S. government keep this much oil on hand? It goes back to the Energy Policy and Conservation Act of 1975. During the 1973 to 74 OPEC oil embargo, prices for
in normal countries we build oil storage tanks. Yeah, but we don't believe in infrastructure here in America, so we just dig holes in the ground. It's all good.
Oil skyrocketed.
As a result, we face the possibility of temporary fuel shortages and some increases in fuel prices in America.
This led to gasoline shortages across the country.
No gas. There's no gas today.
When
Seems wild the locations of these caverns are public. They're heavily armored, and if you try to get close to them, your body will stop being biology and start being physics.
President Ford signed the act into law, it was an attempt to establish a buffer against future supply shocks of this kind. It specified that presidents can tap into the reserves when there's an energy supply interruption or due to obligations of the United States under the International Energy Program. Over the years, that's meant a few things.
Historically, the U.S. has drawn into the SPR for emergency and non-emergency releases. What's an emergency release? It's a hurricane that disrupts all production. What's a non-emergency drawdown? It's a sale mandated by Congress as part of policymaking.
Using that authority, Biden tapped into the reserves starting in the spring and through this fall.
We're going to continue.
Yeah, this is a good point. Sorry, I know I'm interrupting this a lot, but there's a lot here that's worth understanding. Chris Wright called Biden's SPR drawdown irresponsible. Trump's own release ran faster. They're saying that he's a hypocrite. Yeah, that's fine. Biden, 180 million barrels released over 6 months, about 1 million barrels per day. Trump, 172 million over 4 months, about 1.4 million barrels per day, a faster pace. The SPR sits in salt caverns. Oil out means water in, which dissolves salt and weakens the structure. Faster releases do more damage. Biden's pace reportedly damaged 2 of the 4 caverns. So we're now running these down faster than we did before, but we know that if damage was caused now, the government probably wouldn't report it. So it's for all we know, one or multiple of these caverns is already suffering from like serious structural issues. We don't know, because the government would be the one to report us that information, and they probably won't. There we go. Sorry. It could have already broken, for all we know. This is very unlikely, but it is possible. It is genuinely possible that our strategic petroleum reserve is much smaller than we think it is, because there's already been catastrophic damage to one or more of the caverns, and they just haven't reported it. It's possible that's the reason why Trump said we had 4 weeks left, even though relatively conservative estimates at the time suggested we had more than 4 weeks before a collapse. It's possible they know something we don't. We don't know. Does that mean caverns might be so damaged they can't store oil? Yes. Because the water that they put in to replace the pressure from the oil dissolves the salt, because it saturates the water, which means the oil can start leaking through. It's possible that like these reserves are leaking oil into the ground, like they're leaking through the otherwise impermeable salt membrane, because the salt membrane has been damaged by the water that replaced the oil.
Continue to stabilize markets and decrease the prices at a time when the actions of other countries have caused such volatility.
The market for oil has been very tight, and the U.S. has had to balance the fight against inflation, and gasoline prices has been a main driver of that, with targeting Russia and punishing it.
Why didn't we use saturated salt water? I assume they do to reduce the increased salination, but there's only so much that you can do. Also, keep in mind that any movement in or out of the caverns is going to erode the salt just through friction. Like, even if they somehow filled the reserve with like fully salinated water, like no more salt can be absorbed into it, the physical act of pumping water and oil in or out is going to rub against the walls and cause friction. Any movement in the tank erodes the salt barrier.
For its invasion of Ukraine.
Releases from the SPR can help calm oil traders by injecting more crude supplies into global markets. Right now, oil supplies are tight, causing high prices. By taking oil from the reserves and selling it to traders and refiners, Biden is increasing supply in an effort to lower prices at the pump, because gasoline prices are largely determined by oil prices. This strategy has worked in the past. Take when the government tapped into the reserve after Hurricane Katrina as an example. The U.S. sold 11 million barrels to keep production steady for the rest of the country. After the release, prices stabilized. And something similar happened earlier this year due to Biden's March announcement, when he said he'd release 1 million barrels a day.
Treasury Department estimates that the releases that we've seen this year lower the price of gasoline between 13 and 31 cents per gallon. So that's a pretty broad range.
But industry critics say that the oil releases have artificially lowered prices in the short term, dissuading investment in new oil production. U.S. officials said they have...
Just to better understand, is the U.S. hitting and going below floor forced rationing, or do we just stop existing as a state? America's not going to just stop existing as a state. I also don't think we're going to do rationing, though. It seems like the direction we're headed in right now is that Trump is going to use both between doing like oil futures, like shorting the oil futures, and between like presidential pressure. He's going to try to depress the cost of crude as much as possible, but eventually we're going to hit like a rubber band effect where it just rockets upward. The best thing that could have happened for us as a civilization was a slow increase in the cost of oil over time that never abated to engage in demand destruction. But now it's too late. At this point, demand destruction cannot happen overnight in a country like this. Like, we just don't have the will, which means that we're going to run into shortages. The shortages kind of feel like they've already happened in the future at this point. It's just a matter of time. Yeah, the writing's been on the wall for a while here. It's just another symptom of our unwillingness to invest in infrastructure. From the GAO on energy security, why we need a unified plan to align priorities and investment for the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. This was written in May 2026. Why we did this study. In the aftermath of international oil embargoes, Congress authorized the Department of Energy to create the Strategic Petroleum Reserve in 1975 to reduce the impact of disruptions in petroleum supplies. Members of Congress, the GAO, and others have long raised questions about the SPR's optimal size and configuration to meet evolving security needs. Additionally, in 2015, Congress directed the Department of Energy to begin a large project to extend the operational life of the aging Strategic Petroleum Reserve infrastructure after the Department of Energy found in 2014 that a large portion of it required replacement. So yeah, we're dealing with a large backlog here. The draw rate maximum on the reserve is halved, and even if we did level it out, it would take years to refill it since 2014. Do you think the draw rate maximum is going to drop below the 1.4 million barrels per day that Donald Trump outlined for this initial release? Its maximum withdrawal rate has fallen from 4.4 million barrels today to about 2.7, and its refill capacity has dropped as well. Wow. Okay, that's almost by half. So we're not yet at a point where our drawing capacity has been reduced below its current drawing rate. It's just that, like, it's dropping really quick. Although the Department of Energy is releasing oil at a slower rate to reduce wear in the facilities and plans to return the exchanged oil, good luck with that, experts warn that significant long-term investment and rehabilitation are needed to ensure the reserve remains capable of responding. We're already drawing it down to historic levels. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve has not been this low since it was first filled.
Had intended the reserve releases to be a stopgap until domestic production ramped up.
There's only been a slight increase in production so far this year, about 6% since January. And that's largely because the large producers in the U.S. have been conservative with their spending.
Biden has tried to deal with lower production by announcing that he would refill the reserve.
That means oil companies can invest to ramp up production now. With confidence, they'll be able to sell their oil to us at that price in the future, $70.
But analysts have said that shifting from releasing the reserves to refilling them could remove large amounts of oil from the global market, which would continue to tighten supplies and contribute to...
Yeah, well, that's how the economy works, fucko.
America's emergency oil supply sits inside massive...
Sorry, AI. This is AI too? Is this AI? I don't think the diagram is AI. Maybe it is. Hold on. I'd love a diagram. 2,500 feet under the ground is where the tank starts. Why salt caves? Because it allowed us to build very, 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 very large holding containers quickly. We were not meant to use them for this long. We built them in response to an oil supply shock. Why is there a hole that large down there? We dug it. Well, kind of. It was half there, half we dug it. It was aliens. Yeah, we connected a bunch of salt domes. Here we go. That's a good way of putting it. Still, it's a big infrastructure project. Yeah, but it was meant to have expired like 30 years ago. Sure is a lot of salt down there, huh? I want to lick it. Anyway, sorry. The real video we were watching was not the Wall Street Journal video from 3 years ago. We were watching this, why oil prices look set to skyrocket. I realized that we'd never actually talked about what the Strategic Petroleum Reserve actually is. And that's my way of saying I forgot. I remember learning about it back during Biden years, and then I forgot about it, but we didn't go over it again recently, so now we know. It is not actually stored in a bunch of barrels in a tank somewhere or like a depot. It is gigantic caves we've drilled into salt, or like partially drilled, partially utilized, and they are infrastructurally compromised.
The reason we think an oil price spike looks increasingly likely is expectations. In short, one of the other big reasons that oil prices didn't surge during the last phase of the war was that the markets basically expected Trump to chicken out. In other words, they basically bet that Trump wouldn't actually tolerate a severe or prolonged surge in oil prices, both because it would lead to higher prices at the pump in the US, which would make him very unpopular with American voters not far out from the midterms, and because, thanks to AI-related uncertainty, the markets are looking very nervy at the moment, which means that any sort of bad news tends to lead to significant downward movements. The markets thus concluded that, if things actually started getting bad, Trump would chicken out, as he had done in the past. This meant you didn't really see a
But why the Trump administration inherits such a mess? I mean, it's kind of a testament to my point, right? Basically, everything right now that's failing was failing before Trump too. Trump is stupid and his administration is bad, so they are worsening things, but like all of these tendencies were on a downward decline anyway, you know?
But rush for oil futures like during previous oil crises. For context, when people talk about oil prices or Brent crude, they're usually not talking about what it actually costs to physically buy a barrel of oil right now, which is something that most traders don't do. Rather, they're usually actually referring to the cost of what's known as a near-month futures contract, which basically says you'll get a barrel of oil in a month or two's time. This is what most people trading in the oil market actually trade, because it means that as long as you offload your contract in time, you don't actually have to receive a physical barrel of oil, which most traders don't want to do. Anyway, in previous oil crises, everyone would rush to buy up these futures contracts to guarantee access to a barrel of oil, thus pushing up the market price of oil. This time around, however, while there was some of this, hence the jump in oil prices once the war kicked off, lots of traders instead went and just bought insurance, which meant that, on the perceived off chance that Trump didn't chicken out...
This, too, is financialization. It's incredible, but even here, the market recognizes that they're engaging in meta-financialization, where rather than trading on the speculative value of futures oil contracts, they're instead trading on the insurance on the perceived price of the oil future. Like, we're not even... Again, it's every problem is responded to with an infinitely recursive series of financial games played by the world's worst people, rather than like, hey, shouldn't somebody do something about this?
And oil prices did genuinely spike, they would be financially compensated. This speaks to another reason that the markets were able to cope surprisingly well. The insurance market for oil is just way more developed than it was a few years ago or decades ago. During previous crises, the only way for traders to hedge their bets was to dive straight into the futures markets. The insurance market just wasn't well developed enough, which pushed up prices and created a sort of self-fulfilling price spiral, because higher prices meant more people rushing into the futures market to guarantee access to oil, pushing up prices, etc. Anyway, the point we're trying to make here is that people expected Trump to chicken out, which is one of the reasons they went for insurance rather than futures.
Insurance is also always a clean bet. There's a reason why health insurance is such guaranteed money.
The problem here is that the events of the past week or so strongly suggest that Trump has decided that the costs of chickening out and accepting an embarrassingly one-sided deal outweigh the midterm and stock market related costs of restarting the war. Furthermore, the fact that the war has restarted reduces the chance of another ceasefire, both because it proves that the last ceasefire wasn't sustainable and because it will erode whatever trust was left between the two sides. If market expectations adjust accordingly, we should expect oil prices to spike faster this time. The third reason on our list is that there's another war wreaking havoc with the energy markets.
Houthis hit the Saudi International Airport. No. It's going crazy style over there. We haven't even covered, like, the re-beginning of the war, but, like, it's actually going absolutely fucking nutso over there right now. It looks like Israel, America, Iran, and the Houthis are all going to be getting back into it. So, yeah, I would, the Al Jazeera feed is nuts. Yeah, we're going to do this in the next segment, but right now it's just worth, it's just worth taking a peek at the general state of things. The live UA map's looking a little active right now. We'll get to that in a sec.
At the moment, namely the war in Ukraine, where for the past month or so, Ukraine has been striking Russia's energy infrastructure. Most of Ukraine's strikes have targeted refineries, which process crude oil into usable products like diesel and gasoline. But in recent days, Ukraine has expanded the scope of its attacks to include Russian tankers in the Kerch Strait, which links the Sea of Azov.
Russia has been fucking feeding oil tankers to Ukraine lately. I think they've taken down like 50 or something.
And the Black Sea. All in all, this has cut Russia's diesel production capacity by about a third, with significant drops in gasoline and jet fuel too. This is having a significant impact on global markets, not just because Russia accounts for a significant fraction of all refined products, but also because, in an attempt to keep domestic prices low, the Kremlin has banned exports of certain refined products, including most notably diesel, where Russia is usually the world's second largest exporter. All in all, the point we're trying to make is just because we avoided a sudden spike last time doesn't mean we'll avoid it again this time. Now, as you're probably aware, it's kind of impossible to avoid talking or thinking about the big players that control our world, much like the ones we've spoken about today.
Okay, now we're talking about Proton Mail. Yeah, we'll cut the segment here and now get to the actual war. But yeah, genuinely, I know that we all have short attention spans. And listen, to be clear, okay, I'm not like a prophet. When I make a prediction and then it doesn't like immediately come true, when I say, oh, it's over, and then tomorrow I wake up and the sun's still in the sky, I'm like, oof, I hope I don't look like a fool online. I know there are people whose attention span operates in over a scale of like minutes, I understand. It's the reason why I'm generally like hesitant to make direct predictions, because I understand like people often won't believe you until they happen, and even after they happen, people are like, well, you still said it too early or whatever. This is what happened with the fucking transgenocide thing. I was one of the first people who pointed out that the rhetoric from the Republic, it might seem crazy to think now, but back in like 2019, 2020, Republicans were still pretending to care about trans people. Like Steven Crowder would do videos where he was like, you know, oh, trans people are deluded, but we care about their mental health, we want to help them. And I was one of the first people to point out the rhetoric on trans people was always eliminationist. Like the only possible end goal of the movement here was just the eradication of trans people from social life. And I was right, but at the time I got a lot of flack. So anyway, I'm just saying that, like, in spite of the, you know, dangers of making predictions into the future, I really, really, really recommend you guys to structure your lives in a way that can account for, like, catastrophic infrastructure failure when it comes to the availability of petroleum products. Would highly recommend that. Highly recommend.